Okay, good morning, everyone. It's really good to be back. I hope you all had a good vacation and relaxed a little bit and spend quality time with your kids if they're at home, right? And probably you're glad to put them back in school, right? That gives you a little real vacation now for those that have kids at home. Okay, so let's get back to our discussion. So last time, just a quick recap of what we spoke about. It's been 2 weeks. We spoke about this idea, and if you remember, that there's the concept of Lashon Hara is the fundamental part of Lashon Hara is hurting someone else's feelings, right? That's the concept of Lashon Hara, and therefore, right, we spoke about to the extent that the Rishal Salanter says that if you're going to go ahead and ask forgiveness for that person, right, that then and the person doesn't know about it. And by you now having to go ahead and tell them what you did, right, and what you said, and the whole scenario, you're going to hurt the person even more. So then it's not incumbent upon you to go ahead and to ask that person forgiveness straight out. Because what are you going to do? You're going to hurt the person even more. And you're not really accomplishing anything. Because the whole idea of Lashon Hara is you're harming the person. And therefore, what he suggests is that try to find a general time, right, during Erev Yom Kippur or another time, and say, hey, I just want to ask forgiveness for, just for anything that happened. We all, talk and say things, and and just want to make sure that before we go into Rosh Hashanah that we're all good. Try to include it in other conversations where you don't have to go ahead into detail of expressing what you did wrong. Even though normally when you're asking forgiveness from someone, and especially forgiveness from God, right? The Ben Adam l'makom, between man and God. But even Ben Adam l'chaverim, between man and his fellow, and it's something that is known or whatever it is, you're supposed to express. The greatest way of asking forgiveness is recognition of what you did wrong. And you have to explain what you did wrong. But in this scenario where it's going to harm the person more, says Rishal Salanter that you have to be mivater. You have to give up on your ability to ask a complete forgiveness because you're just going to harm the person more. And we saw this in other cases. There was different examples that the person didn't reach the person yet, so you have to try to stop the thing on track. Whoever you spoke to originally, say, hey, it was a mistake, I didn't really mean it that way, whatever it is. But that's what we spoke about last class. We homed in on that idea, but again, the core value, the core point, an important root of Lashon Hara is that constant Lashon Hara is that you're hurting someone else's feelings, right? You're hurting the other person. And to the extent that even if you're asking for forgiveness, you have to make sure that you're not hurting them more by asking them forgiveness. Before we move on to the next day, any questions or comments on what we spoke about in the past classes? Okay, so let's move on. We are on page 88, day 19, and we're switching over to another interesting topic of Lashon Hara. We have, you have an example over here, right? You're and your next door neighbor, whatever, right? It's someone that a lot of times doesn't show up, they're late, this and that. And you're the kind of person that, you have to wait for, you're honking your horn outside the door when you're going to pick them up for something. That's just the kind of people that they are. And you go into case to have your oldest, you go into a fundraiser. In the good old days, we were able to go to functions, right? One day, hopefully in the near future, in 2025, right? Hopefully earlier, right? But and you're going to a childhood fundraiser, and the person opts out, right? You're knocking this, that. I can't do it. I can't go. I didn't get dressed. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. Whatever it is, right? Now you get there, right? And the head of the committee asks, "Where's that person?" You shrug and turn your hands up in the gesture and say, what can you expect? And put your hands up. The committee head says, "Oh, another mystery disaster. Do you speak Lashon Hara?" Right? Doing a gesture, right? A body language. Even if you don't say anything. Let's say you don't say anything. You just, where's that person? Do just a gesture. Is that Lashon Hara? So you're not saying anything. You're not even doing anything. Let's say you just like Roll your eyes, right? Just roll your eyes, right? Emily said, just roll your eyes. So I want to read you the language of the Chavetz Chaim inside. The Chavetz Chaim says like this. Chavetz Chaim says that the prohibition of lashon hara, right? Who bein im hu misaper lav b'pid mamas, even if he's using his mouth, which is the typical way of speaking lashon hara, using your mouth, and us who comes of davar, or he writes the thing down, right, in a letter, and to update the Chavetz Chaim to 2020, right, 2021, sorry, right, 2021. He writes a Facebook message, right, or he sends a text, or whatever it is. Or if he doesn't speak lashon hara straightforward, straight out. Or if he speaks lashon hara in a derech remez, remez is alluding to something, right? A gesture. Anyway, this is called lashon hara. So you got your answer, right? And this is through the English facial expression, gestures, and body language that convey something negative are also considered lashon hara. That comes from the words of the Chavetz Chaim to say, even if you look at remez, even with a remez is a gesture, right? A facial expression. That's what a remez is. What? Remez is a hint. So it could be a gesture, a facial expression. That's what a remez is, right? I meramez something to someone. I'm giving someone a way of understanding something, right? But not actually telling them what it is, right? So it's a gesture. It's a facial expression. It's a, whatever it is, right? That's a remez, right? So that's what the Chavetz Chaim says. Now the question is, why is this? Right? If someone gives a gesture, right, to steal, but he doesn't actually steal, he didn't steal, right? Someone even talks about stealing, and he doesn't steal. He's not prohibited with stealing. Maybe he needs to, get some help, right? But or any other avera, an avera machshava, thinking about something, right, is not, you don't get punished for an avera. Most averas, right? We have to actually do an action. So the action of lashon hara is speaking. Lashon hara, speaking evil. Lashon is a tongue, refers to speaking. So why is it that by lashon hara, right, even a gesture, I understand writing something down, right? I'm doing an action and then I'm showing it to someone, right? But writing something down, the Be'er Chaim goes ahead and says, even if, let's say, something was written by someone else and you go ahead and show that person, and nowadays it's sharing someone else's comment, right? So you didn't write it, you're just sharing it, right? Just sharing it. That is also lashon hara. Why is it? So the Chavetz Chaim explains, and this is something very important, again, a key to lashon hara. Says the Chavetz Chaim, he says, because how do we know about the Isser lashon hara? We spoke about the concept of lashon hara all the way in the beginning. It says, right? You should not go like a peddler in your nation. Right? And if you remember in the beginning, right, we spoke about the concept of lashon hara is lashon and rechilas. So this is more of more the concept of rechilas. Right? But you should not be like a peddler in your nation. Now, what does a peddler do? So the Talmud tells us, right? The Talmud says like this. The Talmud says, sorry, Rashi explains. He's probably quoting the Talmud, right? But he says like this. He said, "Lashon kosher be'ena." Right? That what does a peddler do? Peddler doesn't always speak. Right? You go to a store, right? Whatever it is, they give you like a gesture. Right? You do different gestures to try to attract people to your wares, to your things. Right? So therefore, we learn from there, right, that by doing a gesture, the Torah is telling us that lashon hara is like you're peddling information. And by peddling information, it's not necessarily just speaking the information, but it's any way that you convey the information. So again, it gives us a deeper, not a new perspective, but a deeper perspective, a deeper meaning of what it means of lashon hara. Lashon hara is not only the words you say. Lashon hara is the information that you give over. And therefore, it doesn't make a difference how you give that information over. If it's a gesture, a wink, right? It was like, or whatever it is, whatever kind of information, or have a way you give forth, right? Sometimes someone asks you a question and you keep quiet. No? that's also, right? Because as Stika Kahoda, the Talmud tells us is this concept of Stika Kahoda. And when one is quiet, it's as if he's admitting to something. Stika Kahoda, when one is quiet, is as if they're admitting to something. And so, okay, so the question is, what do we do? Right? So let's say this scenario. We're not talking about the what to do yet, but we're gonna talk about it just a little bit. We'll see later. Right? But what do you do? This scenario, right? The person says, "Hey, where's that person? Right? Where's that person?" You just say, "I'm not sure. I don't know." You don't. You can lie, or you don't know exactly. The person decided not to go. You know every reason why the person decided not to go. Yeah. So you could say, right, or didn't say anything. I'm not interested in coming. So what is not interested in coming? So you're gonna make there's person again. Now look, they just bow out of anything. They're just not committed. That's what goes through your mind because they do this often, or they're just not interested in coming because they don't want to go out. Right? Not interested in coming because they have something to do in the house. They don't want to tell you that they just had a fight with their husband. I don't know. It could be a million things. Right? It could be a million reasons why they're not interested in coming. But you make the assumption, and now you're peddling that information, even if it might be true. And statistically wise, it probably is true. Because 99% of the time, this person decides just to let things ride and can count on them, and they're not responsible. But you could just say, listen, the person can come. And don't make like, I don't know. You know, that expression of you saying, I don't know, or they're just going to make it, right? The way you say it, my mother always used to say, and I've said this many times, my mother always used to tell me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's your tone of voice. Because I used to get in trouble. I'm not allowed to say this lashon hara on myself. But I used to get in trouble. My older brother used to not get in trouble. Right? And I said, but we said the same thing. Right? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And now I tell this to some of my kids also. Right? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's your tone of voice. It's the way you present yourself. It's your gesture. Right? I want to clean up. Or can I clean up later? Right? Or it's not in the mood right now. Daddy, can I not clean up right now? There's different ways of saying it. Right? There's different ways of complaining about something that happened in class. Nothing wrong. It should be open with their parents. Parents have to understand that sometimes the kids see it in a different way and it's not true, and sometimes it is true. But the way it's presented, are they talking chutzpah, or are they just expressing their frustration? Are they talking disrespectful about a teacher, or are they just expressing their feelings? Which again, one has to express their feelings, but it's the tone of voice. Yes, Cindy, I see you have your hand up.
I have such a hard time with all this.
Okay, go ahead.
Because
why?
If you ask me a question about a person, and I really know something bad about them, and I say, I don't know, then obviously that it's going to convey something negative, or am I supposed to lie? Like, why can't I just say what I know as the truth for me?
So it's an excellent question, Cindy. Very good question. So we actually touched upon this beforehand. We're not talking about over here where it's going to harm the person or not going to harm the person. And over here, it's the person decided not to show up to a fundraiser, and the person usually is the kind of person that just commits to things but then is always floozy about it or whatever it is, or any other kind of scenario where it doesn't harm anybody, right? So the person's asking a question of where this person is, right? It doesn't make a difference why the person's not here. The person's not here. It doesn't make a difference anymore, right? So by you saying something negative, there is nothing that's being accomplished, right? About nothing that's being accomplished. We spoke about letoeles. If something, remember we spoke about for a shidduch, right? We never really talked about it, but we talked about it through other conversations. So there's a whole chapter of when it's letoeles, when it's for when it's beneficial, right? Someone is asking information about someone. Someone's asking information about a candidate. Someone's asking information about a certain store, right? And you know that person is a ripoff or whatever it is, and you checked it out and you know it makes sense, right? So we spoke about it. When there is toelis, when there is a reason, there's ways of being able to give over that information, right? With trying to adhere to the laws of Lashon Hara. Yes, if the person needs to know, right, and it's beneficial to that person, so then you could give over the information with certain criteria, which we're not going into right now. But there are criteria of when you're able to give over the information. But in this scenario, there is no toelis. There's no beneficial. It's not beneficial for anybody to know why this to know your assumption of why this person decided not to come, or even if they told you, I'm too lazy, I'm not interested. Right? So why would it be, right? Why would it make a difference, right, for that person to know right now at the party that it's that person's not interested?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
He said to you, I'm too lazy, I'm not interested. And someone asked me, I can't convey that to that person. Oh, he told me he was not interested.
No.
Is that Lashon Hara? He told me it?
Yes, because you can't say.
I can't say what said to someone else.
I don't know, why is there lots of static? Sorry, everybody's telling me there's lots of static.
Not anymore. There's not as much static now.
Okay,
there was
good.
Before.
Okay, good.
Then if you just give over what they say to you.
No, that's still Lashon Hara. That's still Lashon Hara. You cannot.
Even if he said it.
Because they told it to you. Didn't tell you, oh, please go tell everybody that I'm too lazy. What's going to benefit the other person by knowing that that they're too lazy? Why do you need to give over that information? First of all, we spoke about you're not even say Lashon Hara about yourself, right? Second of all, someone tells you something, right? It's not for you to go ahead and tell everybody what they told you. It's just not.
So
it's
they
not.
asked, I said, I don't know.
So then you just tell them they couldn't make it. That's it. They couldn't make it.
Basically trying to protect them.
You're trying to protect yourself also, because you're not allowed to say negative things about people. You're not allowed to say negative things about people. So
Even if they said it.
Even if they said it, yes. Even if they said it. Even if they said it. Remember, we had a whole discussion, right, about learning lessons from someone, right? If someone knows that they, if there's a lesson, it's something that happened in the past, right? Then we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it soon, right? But again, if we get there, we might not get there today, right? But yes, saying Lashon Hara in any form of way, where again, Lashon Hara is, as we spoke about, it's harming the other person. That is Lashon Hara. That you're not allowed to hurt the other person to the extent that you're not allowed to even ask that person forgiveness if you said something, because it's going to hurt them. So just because a person told you, think about it. Cindy, you tell someone something in confidence, right? I'm too lazy today to go to shul, right? Just for example, right? You're never too lazy, but that's why I'm able to pick on you, right? Right? But let's say you say that to someone. Do you expect that person, if someone else, oh, why didn't Cindy come to shul today? Oh, she told me she's too lazy. How do you feel? You think that by telling that person now that you're expecting now the whole Jacksonville, because if you tell one person, you're going to tell the whole Jacksonville is going to know, right? That person's going to write on Facebook, oh, Cindy just told me she's too lazy to go to shul. Is that, just because you told that person, it doesn't mean to say that now you could that person go ahead and tell someone else what you told them.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So it's the same thing over here. When it's a toelis, if you know a piece of information about someone, let's say, for example, if someone asks you if this person should be on a committee, right? And it's a rigorous committee. It's not one of these committees where you're just a name and you don't do anything, but it's actually a committee where you actually do something, and you need to come and volunteer and be there in the night and make sure that you're there early to help set up. And it's one of those kind of committees where, it's really hands-on. It's not just for the name. And they ask you, oh, what do you think about Yatzim Potzel? Right? So then you could say very nicely, in a nice way, you have to be careful how you say it. Say very nicely, I'm not so sure, right, if this person's the right fit. Right? Because, this person, there's a lot of, she or he has a lot of things sometimes that come up, last minute things, and, they're very dedicated, but they sometimes have too many things going on. Say it in a nice way. Give it a positive twist to it. And then you're allowed to say, based on information that you know, that you don't think that this person's a good fit. You have to try to say it in a positive way. You can't say, well, you don't want this person. This is the most lazy person in the world. They take on too much and they never do anything. That person, you don't want him. That's Lashon Hara. Even though you're saying to Alice. Again, it's the way you say it. It's the hinting. And that's what really the depth of what we're saying over here. Even when you're saying something that you're allowed to say, but you say it in a way where you're hinting something negative. That person, you don't want them. You could say it very nicely. That person's a great person, but for this kind of committee, I don't think they're the best. They have too many things going on. They have family and things, and we probably shouldn't put them in that position to have to, be committed to X amount of time. I don't think it's right of us to do that to that person. You hear the difference of the way it's being presented? Even when it's toelas, even when you're saying something positive. So that's the idea of hinting, and that's Rachilus. Yes, Emily.
So in this example, it says the person's a hypochondriac.
Okay.
Right? And could you say,
I would just say they're going to make it.
if they tell you I'm not feeling well, you can't say like.
If they say you're not feeling well, so then you could say, yeah, that person's not feeling well.
Okay,
If it depends. If it's like not feeling well and everybody knows when that person says they're not feeling well, they're having a nervous breakdown, right? So then no, you can't say that. That's a negative thing about it.
So it depends on.
It also depends on what other people know. Hinting Lashon Hara, it also depends on what other people know.
So you have to think about what, like say something like this. You have to think about what it will lead the people to think.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good. Emily Perto very well. And that's what Chavetz Chaim says. Lashon Hara is the other person's going to get hurt. So you have to think about if that person's going to get hurt or not. How is that person going to get hurt? If it's what other people think from the words that you're saying, right? If it's from the gestures that you make, it's the way you present it, right? Lashon Hara is that, and that's why I reiterated what we spoke about and recapped what we spoke about last time. Lashon Hara is that the other person is getting hurt to the extent that you're not even allowed to ask that person forgiveness. If someone's making some static in the background, please mute themselves, right? You're not even allowed to go ahead and ask that person forgiveness if they're going to get hurt from it. So how much more so saying something about the person, if a gesture or something like that, that person's going to get hurt, right? So in any way that the person is going to get hurt, that is Lashon Hara.
You can't say, well, they're not going to find out. Like, you can't use that.
That's not going to find out is not an excuse.
It's like hurting.
It's still hurting that person's still getting. People are still going to. The person's still getting hurt by other people talking about them, and even if they themselves don't get hurt, the greatest way they're going to get hurt is when they hear. The highest level is that they're gonna hear about it, but that person's still getting hurt. Right? People are not gonna. Yeah, you're damaging your reputation. You're damaging financially, whatever it is. Right? Hopefully, you're damaging them. You're damaging them. Okay, we're good. Right? It's a very important one. I'm glad you guys ask questions. That's the best way to bring out the point. Right? Okay, we're ready to move on. Okay, just to reiterate, from here we actually. See the idea of Lashon Hara, and again, remember, this is 2021 now, and if you like someone's comment, right, saying something negative about someone else, right, if you share someone's comment, right, you make an emoji or even a GIF, right, about someone, that's Lashon Hara. That's a gesture. That's a gesture. So you think I'm being harmless, I'm in this, have a secret account, right, or whatever it is, it's still Lashon Hara. And you're doing a gesture of hurting someone else. Social media can be even worse because it's going to spread much quicker, right? But you also harm someone, right? As we say, michtav, or even if you show someone else what someone else wrote, right, about that person, that is Lashon Hara. Okay, let's move on to the next idea of Lashon Hara. All right, so the next concept of Lashon Hara that we're going to talk about today, right, is what happens, and this comes up very often. This is let's turn the page 90. And this happens very, very often. So you know someone, your husband is having a tough time with this super competitive coworker who's always stealing the credit for your husband's work. Right? You're proud of your husband. Right? You used to work with someone, right, just like him, and you learn how to handle the situation. But you tell your husband the story if you don't mention the former coworker's name. Right? So just the way this story is being said, right? It's a lot that's being generated, right? But we're not going to talk about politics, Martha. Right? Are you allowed to? I'm not going to say the person's name. Right? We have this all done. What happens if I don't mention the person? I get this question all the time. I'm sure there's a question you've all been thinking about. Right? I'm not going to mention the person's name. There's lashon hara. Right? So the story over here is you want your husband to learn something. It's also even more. You want to teach your husband something from a story that happened to you and how you dealt with something. You're not going to mention the person's name. Is that lashon hara? So the halakha is this in English, and I'll read a little bit of the Hebrew, but it's important. Even if you don't mention the name, it's lashon hara. If the listener will be able to identify the subject anyways. Also, if you derate a nameless member of a certain group as a way of ridiculing the whole group, there's also lashon hara. I remember we spoke about this. A city, right? Oh, Brooklyn, right? It's certain, right? So a certain place, we said it's a concrete place, right? We spoke about a whole group, a whole place, and so a whole company that you worked at, right? So I'm not going to mention the name, but by not mentioning the name, you're going to say, well, there's certain when I worked in this place, and so now you're really ratting out the whole place, even though it's one individual. You might even be doing worse over here because you're ratting out the whole place. And even if you don't mention it, but your husband knows where you work. That's why I speak about this scenario, because it's most probably that your husband knows, right, who you had a hard time with. So if the person is able to find out, that is lashon hara. Right? So let me read you the language of the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim says like this: "It's the simple lashon hara. Filum eino mevarer beis hasipur zeish stumen daber lo." The prohibition of lashon hara is even if you don't specifically speak out the person's name that you're talking about. Rak, you just say the story. I'm just going to tell you something. Right? I just want to give you a little gossip about someone in town. Right? But through the story, it comes out pretty easy to figure out, right? Or even not easy, but you're able to figure out who the person is talking about. This is included in lashon hara. And more than this, I feel even if there's no negative thing in the story at all. And here he's adding on, and it could be later on they're going to bring this in, but I want to talk about this now because he's quoting this. Even if in the story you're not actually saying something negative about an individual, but it is alluding to, again, if it's alluding to something negative about a person, and the person that is saying this has intentions for people to find out the negative about this person through the story, even though you don't directly say the negative. The rabbis call this lashon hara b'tzina. Talking lashon hara in height, which means literally in height. What does that mean? Right? So you think we call it an ibra chacham, right, in the Jewish language. And ibra chacham means to say you think you're a smart aleck. Right? You think you're smart aleck. So you want to you want to tell people the story that happened to you, right? In the store, right? Or in the shul, or your neighbor. Right? But you know, I'm a good Jewish person. I'm not going to speak lashon hara. Right? So you say over the story in a way that, this story happened to me about in a certain place, and you go ahead and you say the story. You don't mention a name. But people know who your names are, or people know, right? The way that you give over the information. They had a black SUV, with a Torah Academy logo on the back, and how many people have black SUV? The Torah Academy, I don't know if anybody does, right? With a Torah Academy logo on the back, right? So and they just cut me off. It was terrible. Right? They butted the line and boxes, whatever it is. So now everybody can figure out exactly who it is, and so even if it's not so overtly. Or you say a story which you keep it parav, but the way you're presenting the story, I can tell that something negative happened. That is all in lashon hara. You're not being a smart aleck. You're going to be over lashon hara. Right? You're going to be giving. You're going to be transgressing lashon hara. Right? And we call that lashon hara b'seiser. Right? When someone says lashon hara, right, in a hidden fashion, right? And the Talmud says, right? The Talmud gives the whole story. I'm not going to go into it right now, right? About how we find out, right, that this is lashon hara. But the point that I want to bring out from here is, right, that again, because lashon hara is when the person gets hurt, and it doesn't make a difference how the person gets hurt. If it's because of a remiza, a wink, if it's because you're now asking forgiveness from that person, or it comes out because the way you present something, people will be able to figure out who that person is. I didn't say anything, right? I'm not the one that mentioned that person. It was the other person that derived and figured it out. It's still lashon hara. And it's something very important to remember, right? Because this is something that happens, right? We try not to we try to be Ibra Chachams, right? We try to be smart and not say, I'm not going to tell you the name of the person, but let me tell you what happened to me the other day, right? I don't want to be over lashon hara, so I'm not going to tell you the name. And then the other person, of course, the other person tries to figure it out, right? And the way you present it, and then through the conversation, it comes back. I'm not even going to tell you, but they were wearing that dress the other day, or they came to shul in the morning, and they sat in my place, and they usually sit on the other side of the shul by the window, right? But this time they decided to sit in my place. Hello, how many people sit on the other side of the shul by the window in the morning? And like, hello. So. And even though in the beginning it started off that you don't think that you're going to give too much information, and I think, Emily, I think that's what you're saying. We have to remember that once we start a conversation, start a talk, we get caught up in it, we totally lose control. And I know a lot of today we're talking about practical halakha, but think about it, but this really ties into the concept of a radar. Right? We talked about a radar before, but it's a concept of a radar. That we have to be constantly looking and making sure that we have our radar. What's a radar? Right? Submarine or planes, right? That anything that a little blip here and a little blip there, you have to try to stay away from, right? And realize that might be a potential danger. We have to make sure that we have our radar on at all times. And this is a great example of that. You have to make sure that you have a sophisticated 2021 radar, right? That picks up all blips, because this is something that might go on the radar. Because you might think, it's not a big deal. I'm not saying the name. I'm not really saying it in a negative way. Everybody knows anyways that person. I'm just going to link, right? These things are things that we really have to be aware and constantly reflecting on, right, in radar. If you look at the life skills on page 91, right, it says over there that we all look for. 91. Yeah, we all look for things to be successful human beings. I'm not going to read the chapter like the paragraph like we usually don't, right? But you can read through it. But we all look for things to be successful human beings, right? We want to be good students. We want to have good children. We want to have a good job, right? Things to be successful, right? But it says a couple of times, right? Says the training. However, there is one training manual. It's 4 lines from the end of the first paragraph, right after the 3 dots. However, there is one training manual that spells out everything we need to know. We truly want to be successful human beings. That is Sefer Chavetz Chaim, or any of its many diversity that teaches the laws of lashon hara. Shmiras Lashon, it says there. Right? Someone who learns Shmiras Lashon succeeds. He is beloved. He brings Hashem's blessings into his life. He avoids hurting people. He forgoes positive. He forgoes positive relations with friends and coworkers. He brings positive energy and love into his family's life. Thousands of people who learn Shmiras Lashon, right, are testimony to his powers. And this is a powerful quote. It's also the quote of the day. The Manchester Rosh Hashiva, Yehuda Zev Sedel, right? I read his biography. He was unbelievable. He passed away in the 80s, and he was a different generation. Right? He said, I don't know of any family that learns 2 halachos of Shmiras Lashon a day that hasn't seen a Yeshua, a salvation. For anyone who wants the ultimate formula to find favor with God, with Hashem, and his fellow man, this is it. So there's a quote from him, and he's no small person to say this, right? He's the founder of Shmir Shalosh and Yomi. He's the one that started this concept. Chavetz Chaim wrote it. But this idea of breaking up into days, right? The Manchester Rosh Hashiva was the one that started this. Right? And he says he hasn't known anybody that learned 2 halachas a day. It hasn't seen a salvation one way or another. We don't know what that may be. It might be that you're able to keep your job during a difficult time. It might be that thank God you get found, but it wasn't anything bad. And Yeshua, sometimes we think is like I win the $40 million lottery, right? $400 million. Sorry. That's what I hear. I hear the lottery is $400 million now, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean Yeshua. And that actually sometimes occurs. That's actually going to say it very good. That could be a curse in disguise, right? But the idea is because we have to constantly update our radar. And if we don't learn this consistently, like we're doing now, right? Then things like we spoke about today, a gesture, right? Saying something seemingly harmless, not mentioning a person's name, saying a story, but leaving out some of the bad details, but saying in a way that people can figure out the bad details. Those are sometimes beliefs that are missed. I'm not saying anything. I'm mentioning the person's name. I didn't say anything. I just put my hands up. Right? Those are beliefs that we have to constantly update our what's it called in our radars. And the way we do that is constantly learning. I just want to actually finish with a different quote of the day. Right? It's actually for tomorrow's next week's lesson, which I was going to do today, but we didn't get to it. Right? But I think it's very important. And if you turn the page to page 93, we'll do the halakha next week, God willing, right? But if someone, from the Gaon of Vilna, if someone sinned by speaking Lashon Hara or Ruchilus, the antidote is for him or her to constantly speak the words of Torah. Because as we mentioned, Lashon Hara is a spiritual transgression. Our power of our speak is a spiritual thing, it's not a physical thing. So how do we remedy it? How do we make sure that we update our radar, and more importantly, make sure that we have a sophisticated defense system in our mouth? Learning the halachas of Lashon Hara is updating our radar, but creating a sophisticated defense system in our mouth, says the Vilna Gaon, is we have to battle spirituality with spirituality. The negative spirituality of Lashon Hara has to be battled with the positive spirituality of learning Torah and talking Torah. Talking Torah is anytime at the Shabbos table. Make sure you save our Torah. Make sure you ask your family members, your kids, your spouse, yourself. What's this week's Torah portion? Right? Talk about the week's Torah portion. Speak about something you heard. Talking in Torah, right, could be manifest in many different ways. It doesn't have to be you have to open up a Talmud or open up a Chumash. And speaking of something positive that you heard, right, something powerful. And the more you do that, the more you build up the muscles of spirituality in your mouth, which will not allow the negative to come out. Will be a defense force for them. Because again, we're battling spirituality. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to